Welcome to Whispered Truth, where touching stories come alive. Let's jump into today's story.
Sarah Winters stared at her reflection in the smudged bathroom mirror, her fingers trembling as she gripped the edge of the sink. The harsh fluorescent light above cast unflattering shadows across her face, accentuating the dark circles under her eyes and the worry lines etched around her mouth. At 35, she felt decades older, worn down by the relentless grind of her high-powered marketing job and the growing distance between her and her husband, Mark. Outside the locked door, the muffled sounds of her daughter Emma's cartoon and Mark's fingers tapping away at his laptop keyboard served as a stark reminder of the life she was supposed to be living, the perfect family in their picture-perfect suburban home. But lately, everything felt off-kilter, as if she were walking on a tightrope, desperately trying to maintain her balance while the world spun beneath her feet. Sarah took a deep breath, straightening her blazer and tucking a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear. She had a crucial presentation in less than an hour, and she couldn't afford to let her personal life bleed into her professional one. Not when she was so close to landing the promotion she'd been working towards for years. As she emerged from the bathroom, Mark glanced up from his computer, his brow furrowed. "Everything okay? You were in there for a while." Sarah forced a smile. "Just a bit of nerves about the presentation. You know how it is." Mark nodded, his attention already drifting back to his screen. "You'll do great. You always do." His words, meant to be reassuring, felt hollow. Sarah wondered when they had stopped truly seeing each other, when their conversations had become nothing more than perfunctory exchanges. She knelt beside Emma, who was sprawled on the living room floor, eyes glued to the TV. "Mommy's gotta go to work now, sweetheart. Be good for Daddy, okay?" Emma nodded absently, barely acknowledging her mother's presence. Sarah felt a pang of guilt as she grabbed her car keys and headed for the door. She couldn't remember the last time she'd spent quality time with her daughter without checking her phone or thinking about work. As she pulled out of the driveway, Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from her best friend Lily. "Saw your post last night. Everything okay? Call me when you can." Sarah frowned, confused. She hadn't posted anything on social media in days. Shaking her head, she dismissed the thought. She had more important things to focus on. The drive to her office in downtown Chicago was a blur of traffic and talk radio. As she navigated the crowded streets, Sarah's mind wandered to the growing sense of unease that had been plaguing her lately. It wasn't just the stress of work or the strain in her marriage, there was something else, a nagging feeling that she was missing something important. She pulled into the parking garage of her sleek, glass-walled office building with 10 minutes to spare. As she hurried towards the elevator, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Mark. "We need to talk when you get home. It's important." Sarah's heart raced as she stepped into the elevator. What could be so urgent? Had he finally noticed how distant they'd become? Or was it something worse? The doors opened to reveal the bustling marketing floor of Apex Innovations. Sarah plastered on her game face, pushing her personal worries aside as she strode towards the conference room. She had worked too hard to let anything derail her now. As she set up her presentation, Sarah's colleague and sometimes rival, Jake, poked his head in. "Ready to dazzle them, Winters' word is. This could be make or break for that promotion." Sarah nodded, a smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Born ready, Jake. May the best marketer win." The room began to fill with executives and stakeholders. Sarah took her place at the head of the table, her pitch deck queued up on the large screen behind her. Just as she was about to begin, her phone lit up with another notification. Unable to resist, she glanced down. It was a Facebook memory, showcasing a post from exactly 1 year ago. Sarah's blood ran cold as she read the words she had no recollection of writing. Sometimes I wonder if any of this is real, if I'm living the life I'm supposed to, or if I'm trapped in some kind of simulation. Does anyone else ever feel this way? The room around her seemed to blur, the faces of her colleagues melting into indistinct shapes. Sarah blinked hard, trying to focus. She opened her mouth to start her presentation, but the words wouldn't come. In that moment, as the expectant eyes of the room bore into her, Sarah Winters felt the carefully constructed facade of her life begin to crack. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered a terrifying question. What if everything she thought she knew about her life was a lie? The conference room fell silent as Sarah stood frozen at the podium, her mind reeling from the unsettling Facebook memory. The executives exchanged confused glances, their patience wearing thin with each passing second. Miss Winters? The CEO's voice cut through the fog in Sarah's mind. Is everything all right? Sarah blinked, forcing herself back to the present. I'm sorry, could you excuse me for just a moment? Without waiting for a response, she bolted from the room, ignoring the murmurs of concern and frustration that followed her. She found herself in the women's restroom, splashing cold water on her face as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The post she'd seen, it couldn't be real. She would never have written something so bizarre. Yet there it was, a digital ghost from a past she couldn't remember. As she stared at her reflection, Sarah was hit by a vivid flash of memory. She was sitting in a dimly lit room, surrounded by strangers. Their faces were blurred, but she could feel the weight of their gazes. A voice, clinical and detached, was speaking. The procedure is completely safe, Miss Winters. You'll wake up with a fresh start, free from the burden of your past. Sarah gasped, gripping the edge of the sink as the memory faded. What procedure? What past? The questions swirled in her mind, threatening to overwhelm her. A gentle knock on the door startled her. Sarah, are you okay in there? It was Melissa, her assistant. I'm fine, Sarah called back, her voice shakier than she'd intended. I'll be out in a minute. She took a deep breath, straightening her clothes and reapplying her lipstick. Whatever was happening, she couldn't let it derail her career. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to get to this point. With renewed determination, Sarah marched back to the conference room. I apologize for the interruption, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Shall we begin? For the next hour, Sarah went through her presentation on autopilot, her well-rehearsed words flowing effortlessly, while her mind raced with unanswered questions. By some miracle, she managed to deliver a compelling pitch, ending to a round of applause from the executives. As the room emptied, Jake approached her, a mix of admiration and concern on his face. That was impressive, Sarah, especially considering whatever happened at the beginning. Are you sure you're okay? Sarah forced a smile. Just a moment of stage fright, nothing to worry about. Jake nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. Well, if you need to talk. Thanks, Jake, I appreciate it. Sarah gathered her things, eager to escape the suffocating confines of the office. As she drove home, Sarah's mind wandered back to the strange memory she'd experienced in the bathroom. It felt so real, yet so impossible. She had always been Sarah Winters, successful marketing executive, wife to Mark, mother to Emma. Hadn't she? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how hazy her memories of the past were. She could recall major life events, her wedding, Emma's birth, but the details were frustratingly vague. It was as if her life before the present was a movie she'd watched rather than something she'd lived. Sarah pulled into her driveway, her heart heavy with dread. Mark's text from earlier loomed large in her mind. What did he need to talk about? Did it have something to do with her growing sense of disconnection? As she entered the house, she was greeted by an unusual silence. No cartoons blaring, no tapping of keyboard keys. "Mark," she called out. "Emma?" She found them in the living room, sitting side by side on the couch. Mark's face was grave, his eyes red-rimmed, as if he'd been crying. Emma looked confused and scared, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "Sarah," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." Sarah sank into an armchair, her legs suddenly weak. "What's going on?" Mark took a deep breath. "I received a call today from a Dr. Eliza Chen," she says. "She says you're not who you think you are, that none of this is real." The room seemed to spin around Sarah. "What do you mean, not real?" "She wouldn't give me details over the phone, but she insists on meeting with us, says it's a matter of life and death." Sarah's mind flashed back to the memory in the bathroom, the dimly lit room, the clinical voice. Did she mention anything about a procedure? Mark's eyes widened. "How did you know about that?" Before Sarah could respond, Emma's small voice piped up. "Mommy, why do you look different in the old pictures?" Sarah turned to her daughter, confused. "What old pictures, sweetie?" Emma pointed to a framed photo on the mantel, one Sarah had looked at 1,000 times before. But now, as she really focused on it, she realized with a jolt that the woman in the picture wasn't her. The face was similar, but subtly different, a stranger wearing her life like a costume. Sarah's world tilted on its axis as the implications hit her. Who was she really? And if she wasn't Sarah Winters, then who was the woman in that picture? As the questions multiplied in her mind, Sarah felt the foundations of her reality crumbling beneath her feet. Whatever truth lay ahead, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The ticking of the living room clock seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence that had fallen over the Winters household. Sarah sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. Mark paced back and forth, occasionally glancing at his watch. Emma had been sent to her room, but Sarah could hear her muffled sobs through the thin walls. "When did Dr. Chen say she'd be here?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark checked his phone. "A minute now, Sarah. I don't understand any of this. What's going on?" Sarah shook her head, fighting back tears. "I don't know, Mark. I really don't know." The doorbell rang, causing them both to jump. Mark went to answer it, while Sarah remained rooted to the spot, her heart pounding in her chest. A moment later, Mark returned with a woman Sarah had never seen before, at least. Not that she could remember. Dr. Eliza Chen was tall and slender, with sharp features and piercing dark eyes that seemed to look right through Sarah. "Miss Winters," Dr. Chen said, her tone professional, but tinged with something that might have been regret. Or should I say Miss Reeves? Sarah blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, what did you call me?" Dr. Chen sat down across from her, folding her hands in her lap. "Your real name is Allison Reeves. Sarah Winters is, well, she's a construct, a persona created to protect you." The room seemed to tilt around Sarah, or was it Allison? As she struggled to process this information. "Protect me from what?" Dr. Chen's expression softened. "It's a long and complicated story, Miss Reeves, but the short version is this. 5 years ago, you witnessed something you were never meant to see, something that put your life in grave danger. We had no choice but to give you a new identity, a new life." Mark, who had been listening with growing disbelief, interjected. "But that's impossible. We've been married for 8 years. We have a child together." Dr. Chen turned to him, her eyes full of sympathy. "Mr. Winters, I'm afraid your memories have been altered as well. You were recruited to play a role in protecting Miss Reeves, your marriage, your history together. It's all part of an elaborate cover story." Sarah felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. She looked at Mark, searching his face for any sign that this was all some terrible mistake. But she saw only shock and confusion mirroring her own. "And Emma?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. "Is she?" Dr. Chen hesitated before answering. "Emma is your daughter, Miss Reeves, but she was born into this constructed reality. She has no memories of your true past because she wasn't part of it." Sarah's mind reeled as fragmented memories began to surface, flashes of a life she didn't recognize. A small apartment in New York, a job as a journalist, a man's face, handsome but cruel, twisted in anger. "Why are you telling us this now?" Mark demanded, his voice rising with anger and fear. "Why destroy our lives if we were supposed to be protected?" Dr. Chen's expression grew grave. "Because the danger has resurfaced, the people you were hiding from. Miss Reeves, they found you. We need to move you to a new location immediately." Sarah stood up abruptly, her legs shaky. No, I can't. I can't just leave. This is my life. These are my memories. You can't just take that away from me." She stormed out of the living room and up the stairs, ignoring the calls of both Mark and Dr. Chen. She found herself in Emma's room, where her daughter, was she even really her daughter, lay curled up on her bed, clutching her stuffed animal. "Mommy!" Emma's voice was small and frightened. "What's happening?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, pulling Emma into a tight embrace. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise you, no matter what happens, I will always love you. You are real to me, and that's all that matters." As she held her daughter, Sarah's mind raced. If what Dr. Chen said was true, then everything she thought she knew about herself was a lie. But the love she felt for Emma, the life she had built, those feelings were real, weren't they? A soft knock on the door frame made Sarah look up. Mark stood there, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "They want us to pack a bag," he said quietly. "Just essentials. We're leaving tonight." Sarah nodded numbly, her arms still wrapped protectively around Emma. As Mark turned to leave, a sudden, terrifying thought struck her. "Mark," she called out, her voice trembling. "If none of this is real, if our marriage was just part of my cover, does that mean your feelings for me aren't real either?" Mark paused, his hand on the doorknob. When he turned back to face her, his eyes were filled with a mix of emotions Sarah couldn't begin to unravel. "I don't know what's real anymore, Sarah or Allison, or whoever you are, but I know how I feel right now, in this moment, and those feelings, they're the only thing I'm sure of." As he left to pack, Sarah buried her face in Emma's hair, inhaling the familiar scent of her daughter's shampoo. Outside, she could hear Dr. Chen on the phone, her voice low and urgent. In that moment, as her world crumbled around her, Sarah made a silent vow. No matter what lay ahead, no matter what truths were revealed about her past, she would fight to keep this family real or not together. Because in the end, weren't the bonds we forged more important than the circumstances that brought us together? With a heavy heart and a mind full of unanswered questions, Sarah began to prepare for a journey into an unknown future, leaving behind the only life she could remember. The van sped through the night, its headlights cutting through the darkness of the rural highway. Sarah sat in the back, sandwiched between Mark and Emma, both of whom had fallen into an uneasy sleep. Dr. Chen was in the passenger seat, constantly checking her phone, while a stern-faced man Sarah didn't recognize drove in tense silence. As the miles rolled by, Sarah's mind wandered back to the frantic hours following Dr. Chen's revelation. The hurried packing, the tearful goodbyes to confused neighbors, the tense car ride to a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. There, they had switched vehicles and set off for what Dr. Chen called a safe house several states away. Sarah's gaze drifted to the window, watching the unfamiliar landscape blur past. In the reflection, she caught glimpses of a face she no longer recognized as her own. Allison Reeves. The name felt foreign on her tongue, a stranger's identity thrust upon her. As if sensing her turmoil, Dr. Chen turned in her seat to face Sarah. "I know this is overwhelming," she said softly. "But I promise you, everything we've done has been to keep you safe." Sarah met the doctor's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Safe from what, exactly? You still haven't told me what I supposedly witnessed." Dr. Chen sighed, glancing at the driver before responding. 5 years ago, you were an investigative journalist working on a story about corporate corruption. You uncovered evidence of a massive money laundering operation involving several high-profile politicians and business leaders. The words triggered another flash of memory: late nights poring over financial documents, clandestine meetings with nervous whistleblowers, the thrill of chasing a big story. Before you could publish your findings, Dr. Chen continued, they found out there was an attempt on your life. We barely got to you in time. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her side, where she felt a small raised scar she had always attributed to an appendectomy. The operation you mentioned before, that wasn't just to give me a new identity, was it? Dr. Chen shook her head. No, we had to save your life first, then we gave you a new one. The weight of this revelation settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She glanced at Mark, still sleeping fitfully beside her. And them, how did they get involved in all this? Mark was a federal agent assigned to your case, Dr. Chen explained. He volunteered to be part of your new life, to help maintain your cover. As for Emma, she paused, her expression softening. She was an orphan. We thought having a child would help cement your new identity, make it less likely for you to question your past. Sarah felt a surge of protective love for the little girl curled up against her. Biological or not, Emma was her daughter in every way that mattered. So what's changed? Sarah asked. Why come clean now? Dr. Chen's face darkened. Someone talked, we don't know who yet, but information about your true identity was leaked. The people you exposed, they never stopped looking for you, and now they're close to finding you. As if on cue, the driver suddenly cursed, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. We've got company, he growled. Sarah turned to look out the back window. In the distance, she could see a pair of headlights gaining on them rapidly. Hold on, the driver warned, pressing down on the accelerator. The sudden increase in speed jolted Mark and Emma awake. What's happening? Mark asked, instantly alert. We're being followed, Dr. Chen explained tersely. Jake, lose them. The driver, Jake, nodded grimly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he maneuvered the van through a series of sharp turns. Sarah held Emma close, trying to shield her from the terror of the moment. But as she looked down at her daughter's frightened face, another memory surfaced: a different child. A boy with Sarah's eyes, crying as she was torn away from him. Oh God, Sarah gasped, the force of the recollection leaving her breathless. I have a son. I have another child out there somewhere. Dr. Chen's eyes widened in shock. That's impossible. Your file didn't mention any other children. But Sarah knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that it was true. Somewhere out there was a little boy who had lost his mother 5 years ago. A child who had been left behind when Allison Reeves became Sarah Winters. Before she could process this earth-shattering realization, The van suddenly swerved violently. The sound of screeching tires filled the air as Jake fought to maintain control. "They're trying to run us off the road," he shouted. In the chaos that followed the van spinning, Emma's terrified screams, the sickening crunch of metal, Sarah had only one clear thought: she had to survive. For Emma, for the son she had forgotten, for the truth she had sacrificed everything to uncover. As the world turned upside down around her, Sarah Winters, no, Allison Reeves made a silent vow. If she made it through this night, she would reclaim her true identity. She would find her son. And she would finish what she had started 5 years ago, no matter the cost. The van came to a violent stop, smoke billowing from the crumpled hood. In the eerie silence that followed, Sarah could hear the approach of footsteps on gravel. She turned to Mark, who was already moving to shield Emma. "Whatever happens," she whispered urgently, "remember that I love you both. It might have started as a lie, but it became real. It's the truest thing I know." As the van door was wrenched open, Sarah steeled herself for whatever came next. The life she had known was over, but Allison Reeves' story was far from finished. The harsh glare of flashlights flooded the overturned van, momentarily blinding Sarah. She blinked rapidly, trying to make out the shadowy figures approaching. Her arms tightened protectively around Emma, while Mark positioned himself between them and the open door. "Federal agents, everyone out of the vehicle now," a commanding voice boomed. Sarah's heart raced. Federal agents? Were they here to help, or... Dr. Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down. This is a classified operation, authorization code Delta 7903. There was a moment of tense silence before the flashlights lowered. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, his face coming into focus. "Dr. Chen, what the hell is going on here?" As Sarah and her family were helped out of the wreckage, she realized with a jolt that she recognized the agent in charge. It was Jake, her colleague from Apex Innovations. Except he wasn't a marketing executive at all, was he? Jake's eyes widened as he saw Sarah. "My God, it really is you, Allison Reeves." The next few hours passed in a blur. Sarah and her family were whisked away to a secure location, a nondescript government building that hummed with activity even in the dead of night. As Emma was checked over by a pediatrician, and Mark gave his statement, Sarah found herself in a sterile conference room, facing Jake and a team of stern-faced officials. "I suppose I owe you an explanation," Jake began, his familiar, easygoing demeanor replaced by a professional detachment. "I'm Special Agent Jacob Reeves, FBI. I've been working undercover at Apex for the past 3 years, monitoring your situation." Sarah's mind reeled. "Reeves, are we?" Jake nodded, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. "I'm your brother, Allison. When you disappeared 5 years ago, I joined the Bureau to find out what happened to you. I never imagined." He trailed off, shaking his head. As the full story unfolded, Sarah felt as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. The corruption she had uncovered went deeper than anyone had realized, implicating not just politicians and business leaders, but high-ranking members of law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Her death and subsequent identity change had been orchestrated by a small group of incorruptible agents, working outside official channels. "But why come for me now?" Sarah asked. "Why not just let me continue living as Sarah Winters?" A new voice answered from the doorway. "Because we need you, Miss Reeves. We need the evidence you collected." Sarah turned to see a distinguished-looking man enter the room. He introduced himself as Director Callahan, the head of a task force dedicated to rooting out corruption in the government. "Your work 5 years ago was just the tip of the iceberg," Callahan explained. "We've spent years building a case, and now we're ready to move But we need your testimony, your original notes, anything you can remember about what you uncovered. Sarah's mind spun with the implications. Could she really go back to being Allison Reeves? Could she give up the life she had built as Sarah Winters? And what about? Son, she said suddenly, turning to Jake. I remember having a son. Where is he? Jake's face fell. He's safe, Allison. After you disappeared, I made sure he was taken care of. He's been living with our parents, thinking you died in an accident. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as the full weight of what she had lost and what she might regain hit her. I want to see him, she said firmly. Of course, Callahan nodded. But first, we need to ensure your safety. The people behind this conspiracy are still out there, and they are more desperate than ever. As the night wore on, plans were made, strategies discussed. Sarah's head swam with new information, recovered memories, and agonizing choices. By the time dawn broke, she found herself standing in front of a mirror in a small bathroom, staring at a face that was both familiar and strange. A soft knock on the door startled her. It was Mark, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and emotion. Hey, he said softly. How are you holding up? Sarah, or was it Allison now, turned to face him. I don't know, she admitted. Everything's changed, and yet, I'm still me, aren't I? Mark stepped closer, taking her hands in his. You are Sarah or Allison. It doesn't matter. You're the woman I fell in love with, the mother of our child. That hasn't changed. But it has, she whispered. I have another child out there, a whole other life. How can we just go back to what we were? Mark's eyes shone with determination. We can't, but we can go forward together if you'll have me. I want to be there for you, for all of you, your son, Emma. Whatever comes next, I'm all in. In that moment, looking into Mark's eyes, Sarah felt a surge of clarity. The path ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But she was no longer running from her past. She was reclaiming it, along with her future. Okay, she nodded, squeezing Mark's hands. Let's do this together. As they left the bathroom, Sarah caught sight of Emma curled up on a couch, clutching her stuffed animal. Jake sat nearby, watching over his newfound niece with a protective gaze. And beyond them, through a window, she could see the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds. It was a new day, the dawn of Allison Reeves' rebirth. There would be challenges ahead, reuniting with her son, testifying against powerful enemies, rebuilding her life from the ground up. But for the first time in 5 years, she felt truly alive, ready to face whatever came next. As she gathered her family, old and new, around her, Allison took a deep breath. The truth had nearly destroyed her, but it had also set her free. Now it was time to use that truth to bring justice to those who had tried to silence her. With one last look at the rising sun, Allison Reeves stepped forward into her new life, leaving Sarah Winters behind, but carrying with her the love, strength, and resilience she had found in that borrowed identity. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning.
Hey, want to listen to another best story? Then click the floating video and subscribe for more.